Stress is an omnipresent factor of everyday life, and oftentimes it comes in unexpected moments that put an individual's mettle to the test. This is prevalently the case with the majority of university students such as myself, who is currently experiencing quite a fair bit of stress and quite a bit of pressure, considering I'm in the latter half of my degree program. Now, we've been tasked to design an interactive resource that helps to promote either self-care, mutual aid, or playfulness. Naturally, I chose self-care, and so I bring to you De-Stressor. To understand how sound works, which is the bias of which this interactive resource is going to be based off of, I had to sit down and sort of just listen to the ambient noise in a computer lab and let the different sounds dictate the gestures I put down and the medium I will opt to use for it. In this case, I've used a mixture of watercolor, markers, pens, and pencils to get the job done. Some of the more interesting things to note is the fact that most of the sounds that are of intrigue to me actually come intrinsically. So the way I operate my devices, the way I type, my keystrokes, the way I breathe, and sometimes the rumble that you get when you actually plug your ears together. Tutors and peers have looked into my idea with mixed reception. Needs a bit more refinement to begin with, actually, because it's still quite open as a brainstorm. However, the one thing I had to note is that I needed to only cater to self-care, even though that we've made the conclusion with one of my peers that it could actually work hand in hand with each other. So while most of my initial ideas had that prospect, I still felt like I was neither certain or confident if I had the skill set to really deliver something that's a bit more out there and innovative per se. At this stage, I just needed to refine my idea a bit further, really understand the core idea of my design, and also to really get a better contextual understanding of the kind of problem that I'm trying to address, which in this case is stress. So, observing acts of self-care was something I had to do next. Looking at what I do for myself and the different regimes of stress relief that I put myself through. It is one of the only few assignments, funnily enough, that actually aligns with my personal self-interest. And so I afforded myself total creative freedom to actually go through with it. Here's just a table of various acts of self-care that I've done in the past very frequently, and if I were to describe it as a sound as well. Looking at my context to understand what stress was, I looked at various literature, predominantly online resources because they are of the most relevant, and I chose to look at resources that were published within the last 10 years just so I have very up-to-date information on the topic. One of the things I found is that stress actually is all in your head. So the fact that our brain registers, do we fight through the situation or do we flee from it, is exactly the switch that flips that tells the rest of our body to either act on it accordingly. Funnily enough, it could be good for the health too, but in this case, too much stress, like for myself, could actually be bad for me in the long term. Mindfulness is the practice that I was looking at in terms of managing all this stress. It is widely adopted by the mainstream at the moment because of the fact that it takes Buddhist principles, but takes it in a very objective manner in terms of how to solve the problems. It's a very, I guess, empirical way of decluttering your mind right down to having that moment-to-moment awareness of what's going on around you. My final design proposal then in that case was a mobile-based application that uses multi-sensory responses. I opted to do, in this particular order, sound, sight, and touch, intended to be optimized for mobile and tablet and using fingers and stylus for input. And of course your audio and visual and tactile components as feedback. I'm wanting to do a minimalistic and intuitive design for this one in terms of its user interface, just to reinforce that notion of decluttering, that notion of tidiness and openness in terms of how we declutter our minds personally as well. And it allows for the user to set their preferences, routine, and goals so that the resource can then adapt to how it will work for the end user, and also help them progress further in their own journey of mindfulness. Here's just a few of sketches that I've done, which is the wireframe work for how it would look like on the screen. And these are just my references for all of that.